and actually lays out to where we have to have a situation where the American people are ultimately always feel like there's some threat out there, and that we need to be in this case to where we're able to solve these problems that would cause physical altercations. We need to be able to solve them with other things. One of the things he lays out is manipulating people's moods and thoughts through radio waves, using alpha brain waves, beta brain waves, and such to actually change the mood in a room to make people more agreeable or to make people more agitated, to where you can actually get the results you want by injecting certain type of radio frequencies into the room. Long story short, I feel like because we get our information so third party, like we don't really know what's going on. Even what we're talking about is stuff that we may have read in books or anything like that. We get our information so third party, and we really are the world's global supermarket. I mean, if the world is a supermarket, we are its Walmart. And I feel that we have to be in this fluctuating state of fear and comfortability in order to fuel the global markets, because we are the Walmart. We are where everybody's goods and services come to be bought. And so I feel like we kind of are more of a world government, or maybe even a world economy in that sense. And part of it is tied in with this psychological warfare that I think is going on. Any thoughts on that?
You said a whole lot right there, but I still want to know how that has anything to do with whether or not we should inject Lysol.
That's a good point. I mean, probably because whoever owns Lysol, Procter & Gamble Corporation or whatever, really wanted to, really had a back stock of Lysol and couldn't produce anymore. So we were going to lose all these Lysol production jobs unless they got rid of the source. So here we are.
Now we're on to something. See, that's where I was going.
Nice. So it's almost like I killed the conversation with my talk of satanic Michael Aquino.
Yeah, because you're a fucking weirdo, Bo. But I did want to jump in real quick because I have to work early in the morning, so I'm going to hop out of the conversation, guys. But I appreciate you guys calling in and talking. And, Bo, I love you, but I have to go to sleep or I'll be miserable tomorrow.
All right, fuck off.
Yep, see you guys later.
Yeah, as soon as we start talking about deep political conversations and such, Dave is, his brain starts to fry, and he has to plug into artificial intelligence.
The Satan part, it's kind of hard to know where to go with that. I never really heard a lot of that. To be honest, I'm educated, but I don't know anything about that shit.
It's really interesting because the way that I even heard about him, and somebody has both us on their phone and in the background, which is giving an echo. Just so you know.
Yeah.
The way I even heard about
Definitely
him was, you know when you go to Walmart and there's those signs and there's the missing children. Well,
yeah,
I was looking at. Yeah, I was looking at them, and I seen one that was interesting because they will put pictures of the kids, what they think they look like now. And this person had been missing since like 1984, right? So I Googled this kid's name, and what came up was a really interesting, like it was this big rabbit hole that I went down, which started with, because he was missing from Nebraska, and around that time, in the early 80s, there was a number of kids who were being abducted. And it ended up being tying into the Franklin Credit Union. Yeah, the Franklin Credit Union scandal, tying into the boys' home in Nebraska, the Catholic boys' home there. And that's how I ended up finding out this Michael Aquino. because he was
Have you
accused
seen
of something called satanic ritualistic abuse.
I was just going. There's a Netflix documentary where they talk about the whole network of like underground child kidnapping and shit. Like it's not necessarily related to exactly what your story is there, but if you haven't seen it, it's literally basically saying how they know kids' patterns and how they operated, and they knew how to like basically go and like literally had a whole like big operation. We always think of that as just something crazy that occurred, and as if it was like random, but it wasn't random. It was actually very much a formulated process that they were doing back in the 80s, like catching kids on their paper routes, or they knew your walk home and they knew who walked by. It's just crazy, and it wasn't necessarily Satanists they were talking about. It was just like this whole like dark world of like celebrities or something like that. And I don't know that it wasn't Satanism, but it was something else where they were like talking about like this whole group of leaders that were driving this entire economy of like stealing children. It's you got to see it if I'm way out of context, but I mean it's very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely a new. I would say there should be a new interest in it, because especially with all the things that happened recently with the Jeffrey Epstein case, a number of accusations of high status politicians and pedophile rings. I feel like there's been a lot of interest in that recently, and when you look back, I think it's kind of a scary thing. A lot of people have said it was a hoax. It was a number of different things, but I also feel like these things were happening at a time before we had the internet. And
absolutely,
as we've said on this podcast before, there's no limit to the amount of obsessiveness and the amount of boredom that I think rich people with a lot of time on their hands would get into. And I think that kind of fuels that thing to where that very well could be a possibility, to whereas in this whole Franklin Credit Union scandal, this guy was a very high-ranking member of the Republican National Committee. He actually would sing the Star-Spangled Banner at the RNC. And he got caught up in this whole scandal and stuff where there was all these accusations of parties he would hold, and he would actually have young boys who was there. And I know this is a prevalent thing that keeps coming up in Hollywood. I mean, even the whole Corey Feldman thing that just came up, talking about, the guy who was the Wesley Crusher on Star Trek, he came out with the whole thing that Kevin Spacey raped him when he was a kid. So, I mean, these things keep coming up.
Didn't Corey Feldman just say that Corey Haim was raped by Charlie Sheen? Look at all this stuff coming out now. Like, it's almost like they're like turning on each other and they're getting exposed, like your Epsteins and your Weinstein, or maybe I'm making some of the wrong names here, but it's just crazy because the documentary I'm telling you about, that shit that was out before the Me Too movement ever even started. And now, Me Too then turned into pedophilia and all these other issues. I think it's absolutely crazy, and it's just weird how now we're starting to hear more about it. Like Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, we remember watching those kids grow up. We didn't know any of that shit was occurring, and then you end up hearing all these stories. It's very telling as to who Hollywood people are, and I know a lot of people admire them, but I don't think there's a whole lot to admire about some of their culture.
But yeah, I mean, I would agree, and I don't think it goes back to that where, I think especially in a time where there was a lot of money being thrown around, a lot of people with a lot of power, there was a lot of drugs, a lot of partying, and power in the hands of people who probably shouldn't have power over another person. And I think, man, Dave Chappelle in his special The Bird Revolution, I think he really hit the nail on the head when he said that the only way we're really ever going to know what's going on and to what level everything happened is that everybody has to be able to come to the table and say what they did, and say pretty much, what level of involvement they were in, and without all this outrage. And then maybe we can actually have a conversation and fix things. Because if there's a system in place and there's corruption going on, the people who benefit from the corruption are just as much victims as the people who are, at least maybe to a lesser extent, but they're victims too, even if they were part of the system. It's the system that's corrupt, not necessarily the people who are in the system.
I mean that's fair, but don't you have to kind of look at it and say, well, if you have power, you have a certain responsibility on how to handle that power. It goes back to our economy conversation we were just having. If you're in Hollywood and you have this incredible influence, this incredible wealth, you decide who's going to act in the show, who's not going to act, and especially at the kid level when you want to go down to the pedophilia page, it's like, I'm not ready to go ahead and let the people who are the perpetrators, treat them like they're victims too. I'm just not ready for that, because I just feel like as we go along in life, right, like how smart were you when you were 18, all right? Now, how smart were you when you were 25? And how smart were you when you were 30? And as you get more exposure in the world and you start learning things and you get more confidence in how you operate and et cetera, you know a lot of things, or you have gained knowledge and influence, et cetera, and how to influence people over that period of time. You now have an obligation to that, what you like ignorance is bliss, I guess, is a simplistic way of saying the same thing, right? Like if you've went through all that and you're at that level and you have that power, well, then you have an obligation on how to do that. It's very indicative as how you, when somebody or something is in power, how you use that influence is very indicative to what kind of, leader you are. But it's hard for me to just turn a blind eye and say that somebody who was part of the process, that they're a victim also. Sure, to a lesser extent, but it's kind of like saying Bernie Madoff was a victim to his Ponzi scheme. I guess he's in prison, so now he's a victim if you want to go that route, and hopefully I'm not leaping too far here. But it's just hard for me to, let them be called victims, because to me, they're the perpetrators. When you have power, when you have influence, and you can use it for good or you can use it for bad, and that's not something that people aren't able to. I think people can gauge that. I think when you have that much power, like somebody like a Putin or a Xi or a Donald Trump, clearly they know when they have power, and the way they operate, it's hard for me to just give them benefit of doubt, even though maybe they were also victims. You know what I'm saying? I guess that's my trouble.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily saying that they're really victims per se of the system. I'm just saying that you're not going to really get to the how to fix the problem if the people who are in charge and the people who really know how the system works, if those people are not compelled to actually come forward and be able to talk about how it works and what part they played in it, without at least receiving some type of benefit of the doubt. Because you're going to have, in these types of things, you're going to have people who are imperfect allies, right? But if some people engaged in some of the activity and then feel bad about it, but they realize, that they never should ever speak of it, because if they ever speak out about it to try to help out and stuff, they're going to get dragged back into it, then it's always going to perpetuate itself. And it's going to be like a closed, the military closed rank system, the same type of thing. Whenever somebody does something wrong, everybody closes ranks and protects the system, as opposed to actually growing and finding out what's wrong, and really everybody is able to, benefit from that.
To me, that's what the history books are for, right? Like, we're going to find out what the good story or negative story was, but we all know who the story writers are going to be, right? They're going to be the winners in history, and they're going to be the ones who are going to perpetuate whatever belief system they want to carry forward, and that's fine. But, so when you talk about, when Chappelle, I love Dave Chappelle, him being from Yellow Springs, maybe it makes me biased, I don't know, but every time I watch him, when he did Sticks and Stones, and he gets up there and he says, I'm gonna make jokes, and you're gonna either laugh or you're not gonna laugh, but I'm not gonna